Hello everyone, this is Magbo Gaming here and welcome to episode 2 of my video game documentaries. This video will cover both the original Game Boy and the Game Boy Color as well. Why did I decide to put both in one? Because in many ways the graphics are so similar to it, and the fact that certain Game Boy Color games can still be played on regular Game Boy like Pokémon Silver and that One Piece Japanese Game Boy Color game I got here made in 2002. Yeah, I think you get the gist. So the previous first episode of the series covers the Super NES, and following that up to the Game Boy, which was the very next gaming device I received back in 1995 alongside a copy of Kirby's Dream Land 2 and Tarzan. Yes, this type of Tarzan. The Game Boy I first had back in the day was the Red Play Aloud edition of the regular Game Boy. The one I'm showing here sadly is not the original Game Boy I grew up with. It's a different model with the red screen that looked like it came out from a Virtual Boy. I made a review on this Game Boy on my other channel, DXX Archive, so if you wish to watch the full video on that, I posted a link in the description below. Also, if you want to support this channel and what I do, I just opened up a Ko-Fi account for tips and donations. Link in the description below. It will certainly help keep this series going. So without further ado, let's start off by explaining the history behind the Game Boy and what it's all about. The original Game Boy first came out in 1989, and they also had a pack-in game called Tetris, which they chose over Super Mario Land since Tetris appeals to pretty much everyone in the general audience, rather than the Super Mario Land that appeals to many people but not to certain demographics. It was a genius move from the Game Boy creator Gunpei Yokoi to sell more of these systems out there, and Mr. Yokoi is also the creator of the Game & Watch handheld devices. What really improved upon buying a bunch of handheld devices tied to a specific game is to sell a gaming device where it could play hundreds of different cartridges, which is interchangeable within this device. So games themselves will be much cheaper for the consumers to buy. Let's talk about Tetris for a moment. My copy of Tetris here is in near mint condition, which I'm very proud to have. It's also one of the first games I owned for the system as well, where it's a pretty simple puzzle game, but the replayability of the game makes people want to come back to play more, especially during times when they are just maybe waiting for a plane or a train ride, and would like to get some minutes of play on Tetris. Tetris has set itself to be a gateway to more games on the Game Boy to be made, and have an opportunity to be sold for it. It's what initially allowed the Game Boy to be successful. Tetris sold 35 million copies. Super Mario Land, which I also own in very mint condition as well, is another game that a lot of people really enjoyed. It was simple to pick up and play, where all you need to know is how to run and jump to surpass obstacles. It sold over 18 million. You know what did far better than Tetris though? Yes, it was literally a game that released in North America like 9 years after the Game Boy was released. Yes, 9 freaking years, which is insane. And that would be the combination of Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. Sure, Tetris did sold 4 million more units than the combine of Pokemon Red, Blue, and Green worldwide. But if you want to add Pokemon Yellow to the mix, it sold a combined of 46 million copies, while Tetris sold just 35 million in comparison. For games to top Tetris 9 years after its release is very monumental. Many Game Boy games were released over the span of 9 years. The Game Boy Pocket was released about 7 years ago after the original Game Boy release, and just 1 year after the Play Aloud Color came out, which was the year I got the very first Game Boy. Chose the red one, of course. But shortly after the Pokemon games were released in the US, the Game Boy Color was released on November 18th, 1998 in North America to continue the Game Boy line for a few more years before the Game Boy Advance was released. Most of the earlier Game Boy games, such as the Pokemon Trading Card game and Pocket Bomberman, came in a solid black Game Boy Original-like cartridge, which indicates that it's compatible on both Game Boy Color and the original, as you can see here. However, more of the later Game Boy Color titles started to come in a different cartridge form, which is a transparent looking cartridge that is more rounded on the top, and the little gap on the top right corner that the original Game Boy cards had has been blocked off in the new Game Boy Color cartridges. This is to let the general consumer know that putting a Game Boy Color cartridge on a Game Boy Original will not even turn on, since the plastic that comes out when turning it on will not go through. And if a Game Boy Color game is inserted on a Game Boy Pocket that did not have the plastic thingy, we'll just give you a unique message saying that the game is only compatible on Game Boy Color. Stuff like that had to be done to ensure which Game Boy Color games is compatible with the old Game Boy and which are not. Of course, the Kirby Tilt and Tumble cartridge is also a Game Boy Color thing, even if it says just Game Boy on the cartridge. I would imagine some kids were confused there, thinking that it will work on a Game Boy Pocket as well. But what's strange is Pokemon Gold and Silver, which came in November of 2000, was compatible with the original Game Boys, but the Crystal is not. I wonder why. So as I was saying earlier, I first got my red original Play It Loud Game Boy back in the summer of 1995, and the first two games were Kirby Dream Land 2 and Tarzan. Kirby's Dream Land 2 is actually the very first Kirby game I ever played in my life, and it was what got me truly introduced to the Pink Puff Bowl. It was simple to learn and I had a lot of fun. I love that this game introduced me to sucking up enemies and getting some of their powers. Also with the power of the animals that helps out Kirby, like Coo the owl, Wick the hamster, and Kind the fish. This Tarzan game I never understood very well. Sadly, it's not Disney's Tarzan, so as a kid, I had no idea how to pass level 1. So yeah, I think it's a game that Dad chose for me, and I chose Kirby. Sometime later the same year, I found 2 more games in a recyclable area in the New York City building I was living in, since my dad was a superintendent at the time in that same building, which were Tetris and Paperboy, which I remember so fondly. They were not that great of games to me at the time, but I had fun with Tetris. But I was a little bit lost when I played Paperboy. Perhaps I should get Paperboy and Tarzan back in my collection for the sake of nostalgia. What do you guys think? I also remember by Christmas of 1995, my dad bought me Donkey Kong Land for the Game Boy since I really enjoyed Donkey Kong Country the year prior. I also love the yellow cartridge color of Donkey Kong Land on Game Boy as well. It's pretty much unique for it. Then a few years later, when I couldn't get much Game Boy games at the time, I bought Pokemon Red in March 2000. And of course the Pokemon games has their own color cartridges as well, which makes them very unique in their own virgin colors compared to the rest of the games. I remember the experience of starting a Pokemon journey, Charmander being my very first Pokemon, and raising levels to train them to become stronger. Dare I say it's the very first experience I ever had in a JRPG type of game, and since that game, I was really into the genre itself. A few months later, I remember also picking up Pokemon Yellow and playing the same game again, but only this time with Pikachu as a starter Pokemon. Making Pikachu voice acting, which is not much of a thing on the Game Boy. My very first Game Boy Color game itself is Wario Land 3, and it was unlike any other 2D platformers I ever played before, which is not completely linear, and it's like a treasure hunting kind of game. Every time you get certain treasures, some changes can happen in previous level that you visited, and then you have to go back and play them again to access new parts of the level that you were never able to access before. By November or December of 2000, I believe I bought Pokemon Silver on the Game Boy from someone at my public middle school that I attended at the time, and I remember being very hooked with this game. Second gen Pokemon games, Gold and Silver. I had the Silver of course, and it truly was an amazing upgrade from Pokemon Red and Yellow with 100 new Pokemon, 16 badges in total, 2 new types of Pokemon being Dark and Steel, and in full-fledged colors. I must say that I truly enjoyed the Game Boy a lot, especially once I got into the Pokemon games and many of the other side-scrollers as well. I remember it was the last Game Boy game I received before moving to Puerto Rico for good on March 2001. Then, during 2001, I did some trades for used Game Boy games like Bunk's Adventure, which now I have a condition upgrade, my original 2001 copy.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no.
Yeah, let's just leave it at that. Also, I remember Turok 2 on Game Boy, and then it's been a while since I got the other Game Boy games, but I will say this. I never truly stopped collecting Game Boy games. I never sold my original lot. It just updated thankfully. As for the next 2 decades passes by, you can see now I have a big collection having most of the games that I ever wanted now. Yeah, and there are still Game Boy games that I'm on the hunt for in 2025, so of course the journey continues. I really truly enjoy gaming on the Game Boy. It started off as a black and white console, which they decided to keep it simple for the first 10 to 12 years of their lives. While the Sega Game Gear and Atari Lynx tried to compete against the Game Boy, they both failed because even if they were in color and the Game Boy was in black and white or green for the regular Game Boy, they required too many AA batteries, like 6 of them, and their battery life was only like 2 to 5 hours, while the Game Boy uses 4 AA batteries and they can last quite a while. How much? Compared to the original Game Boy, literally can last up to 30 hours? That's crazy. And the Game Boy Color was 10 hours of battery life. Certainly still lasting longer than the Atari Lynx and the Sega Game Gear as a color system being introduced by Nintendo. Nintendo went underpowered with the Game Boy just like they went with the Nintendo Wii because of cost and innovation. The game library for both was immense and appealed to a wider audience than Sega and Atari's portable systems. So Nintendo played it smart and focused on the quality of the game being released for the Game Boy. And there sure were a lot indeed. Many hours of fun side-scrollers, Pokemon games, other JRPGs, and many other great third-party titles making it to the system as well. At the end, the Game Boy and Game Boy Color combined sold over 118.69 million units during its whole life, which is the 4th best-selling system of all time, just right below the PS2, Nintendo DS, and the Nintendo Switch. Right above the PS4 you can say by a bit over a million units. I also like that the Game Boy family of system has a huge array of colors that you can choose from depending on your taste and favorite color. I own the red original Game Boy with the Virtual Boy screen. The yellow Game Boy Pocket, which I was able to mod myself, replacing the screen as you can see in this thumbnail. If you wish to watch the video I made last year of me modding the Game Boy and how I was able to pull it off, the link for that video is in the description below. And shoutouts to my buddy Luma's Play who taught me how to fix the problem I had with the progress of this modding I did too, using that paper behind the contacts of the screen behind. Anyways, I also have a Game Boy Color, which I also made a review on this a long time ago, which I will also leave the link below as well. It's a third-party Game Boy Color system with a backlight and a decent amount of built-in Game Boy games installed in it. It's a budget-friendly Game Boy from China that takes physical Game Boy cartridges, and the shapes are very similar to the Game Boy Color as well. They should be under $100 to this day if you want it. So my conclusion on my Game Boy experience, it's very nostalgic and simple to just pick up and play. I would always go back to playing these old Game Boy games here every now and then. Crazy that there was a Game Boy game released by Limited Run and Crunchyroll back in 2023 called Hime's Quest, which plays a lot like The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. I still have this in my collection today and I love the box art they made for it. And a blue cartridge color too. The orange counterpart also exists, but you needed to pre-order it from the Crunchyroll's website back then in order to get one in 2023. So that's all I have to say about this video. The specs of the Game Boy was pretty underwhelming as you can see here, but capable enough to make fun, enjoyable games with limited tech that they had, and there is nothing else like the Game Boy. And just a reminder that if you wish to support my channel in any ways, you can like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and comment below what you think of the Game Boy and your overall experience about it, if you have experienced it at all. What are some of your favorite games on the Game Boy and why? Let me know. Would love to hear from you and will certainly respond to it as soon as I can. And if you wish to donate any amount of money towards the production of this video, feel free to donate to my Ko-Fi link below. Either ways, I would appreciate any support you choose to give me. I hope this video was entertaining to you in some ways. So with that being said, the next documentary will be focused on the Nintendo 64. I hope you look forward to that. And until next video, good luck with the Game Boy hunt if that's your plans. Hope you find the games you're looking for, and I will see you all in the next video. Magbo Gaming out. Bye bye. Thank you for watching this video. Check these videos too that are related to what you just watched. I'm sure you will find some enjoyment there. You can also follow me on Instagram and support the channel via Patreon or buy my Magbo merch. Links below. Hope to see you again soon.